No mai, haere mai, tēnā koutou, I tēnei ahi ahi. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Margaret, and my role as convener of the South Alive Housing Action Group is to welcome you all and to ensure the smooth running of the seminar. So no pressure, eh? It's up to you, really. Thank you for attending this special evening, which is part of our program to explore alternative housing options. But tonight's topic is a slight twist on that theme, being urban gardening. First, though, some housekeeping. In keeping with level 1 COVID restrictions, I assume you all took advantage of the hand sanitizer at the door. I won't blame and shame anybody, but I hope you did. And as you booked your place here tonight, that is sufficient for the tracing process, although using your phone to do whatever you do with it, I haven't got one, being marked off. It was supposed to be Maria, but she delegated to Martin. Well done. In the event of fire, those in the back room and in the foyer, please use the exit you came in. And those in this room, this is like on the aeroplane, one's next to the door. Make sure the door is open and feel free to throw anybody out that you can reach. That's the exit. And we gather at the mall car park. Toilets can be found by going down the hall and then turn left at the sign. Please don't go into the shop. You'll set up the most excruciating alarm. In the event of an earthquake, drop, cover and hold is the order of the day. So you drop, cover yourself under the chair. Good luck with that. You'll also need to move away from glass areas, and you know we've got mostly glass. So when your shaking stops and the earthquake stops, we'll reassess the situation. And finally, please raise your hand if this is your very first visit to this venue. Still some of you. 100,000 welcomes. And do take good note of our building here and our venue, and then look at the shop on the way out. It's closed, so you don't have to spend any money. Now, our speakers tonight come from a variety of places. The South Coast Environment Centre in Riverton, our very own Fruit and Nut Tree Action Group at South Alive, the Batch Coffee House, yes, a different slant on our theme, and the ICC Compliance Team, and finally our South Alive Community Development and Operations Manager. A wide variety, so there is sure to be something for everyone. So, the format for the evening is, our main speaker will have 20 minutes, followed by 10 minutes questions. The rest will have 10 minutes each, followed by 5 minutes questions. Last month, people were so enthusiastic that they asked questions during the presentation. We really would prefer that you hold those till the end. It does upset the flow and the timing, and I've got all the times in red in my notes here. Because we have a bigger speaking team this evening, the timing will be reasonably rigid, so that all have equal shares. We will wind up with a cuppa, finishing the evening around 9:30, quarter to 10, give or take. The presentation will be filmed and will eventually go on our South Alive YouTube connection so you can see it all again and share it with your friends. We will not be filming the audience. So privacy, and because you haven't got your tiaras on tonight, ladies, we won't be doing that. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Nick Kiddy. Nick was a primary school teacher, we won't hold that against him, in Nelson before. I was a primary school teacher, so was Colin. Yes. Before moving to Riverton, where he is the Education and Projects Facilitator at Riverton Environment Centre. He has a degree in applied environmental science, an extensive background in organic gardening, particularly in urban and suburban environments, with a focus on permaculture design, food production, composting, and biodiversity. I don't know what he does on Tuesdays. Being from Riverton, he's also very familiar with Robin and Robert Guyton's work, including their forest garden and the community forest garden in the Riverton's Main Street. Please welcome Nick Kiddy.
Thank you, Margaret. I'm just going to set my timer just so I get in trouble. Kia ora koutou, I'm Nick Kitty, and thank you very much, Margaret, for the introduction. It's a real privilege to be invited to be here this evening and to find out that I've actually got the longest speaking time, as I feel a little bit self-conscious about that, but hopefully I'll make it interesting and information-filled, and I won't go over time. I'm going to crack right on in. So, hopefully this is all going to work. Yep, great. So there's a little bit about me, and Margaret already mentioned. I'm super lucky that I moved to Riverton nearly 3 years ago and got a job at the Environment Centre about 6 months ago, and I'm super privileged to be in that position. And that reflects the fact that the Environment Centre is going through quite a growth period at the moment, and my sort of personal background is sort of an ideal fit with the way the Environment Centre functions. One of the best things about it actually is that it's an independent organisation, so I don't have to kind of keep towing all of these lines that I have done when I've worked for councils or for schools. So that's quite a privilege, really. Yes, really happy to be here. And yeah, my main interest is family, community, cost avoidance and food sovereignty, and that cost avoidance is something that will be a sort of a recurring theme. And for me, that's making sure that I don't need to work all the time. I can spend lots of time with my family because we don't spend much money and we live super cheaply. So that's kind of our whole approach towards life, really. So just quickly, the Riverton Environment Centre was established by the South Coast Environment Society. It's the oldest continually running environment centre in New Zealand. And we own our own building that was crowd-funded about 5 or 6 years ago. So that was a pretty major achievement. That's the base for all of our projects, and we're very lucky that we get funding from Environment Hubs Aotearoa, which comes via from the Ministry of the Environment. But we do a lot of fundraising as well. I've just recently created this because having started at the Environment Centre, I had to get my head very quickly around all the different projects that are going on, and I just couldn't do it reading all of these pages and pages. So I made this very simple diagram that kind of shows. You should have seen the pages of stuff I was reading. So just sort of showing the range of projects that we're involved with, and I won't go into detail on that right now, but there's quite a few. So tonight I want to talk about where does food fit. That's the real interest of mine, and I did this sketch trying to illustrate how I saw different food production systems fitting especially within urban environments. And when I look around, I see a significant amount of waste in terms of time and money by the managers of public urban spaces, and I see lots and lots of potential in those spaces. So being a permaculturist, I'm very interested in looking at how challenging situations can be turned into positive outcomes. And so I'll get back to this again shortly. So I did this very rough calculation looking at a generic Invercargill suburb, and I just used Google Maps and it was super rough, but roughly 2/3 of suburbs, and I bet this is more than just Invercargill, is grass, it's lawn. That's backyards and verges. Now, Invercargill citizens roughly over the year, I calculated, spend about $2 million looking after their grass. Okay, that doesn't include council parks, reserves or sports fields. Okay, that's just backyards and verges. I just did that really roughly extrapolating from a neighbourhood basically, and then by the population of the city. So why are we spending so much money on grass? You can't actually eat it unless you're a sheep, right? But there's our opportunity to be looking at converting a lot of this lawn into food, and particularly, and also biodiversity support, but particularly no-dig gardens are so easy and really one of the best methods you can use for establishing a food garden. Containers for renters, perfect too. So here's some buckets. I sowed this a couple of weeks ago. It's got peas and lettuces in it, coming up beautifully now. At the Environment Centre, over lockdown, we put together 5,000 of these Aotearoa home vegetable growers packs, which were sent out to needy families across the South Island. And in each pack, we have a bit of an introduction and very simple instructions. We have a little project diary and 4 packs of seeds, enough to sow 1 square metre of garden. So carrots and radishes, peas, salad greens, and mixed beet and spinach. So that's 1 square metre food. I also worked out that that could be 16 buckets. So if you had buckets instead. So, if you own your home, you can make a garden. If you don't own your home, well, make a garden that you can take with you if you need to. 16 of these is a square metre. But key resources for any food production system, seeds and compost. And currently most of those things don't come from within the region that we live in. The compost that we're buying in single-use, non-recyclable plastic bags from garden centres, more often than not is coming from far out of town. And the seeds, even further, those seeds are mostly coming from Italy or California, most of the seeds that we grow in New Zealand. So when you're going out and buying seeds in the, in your garden centre, they're probably from far away. Now they are prone to the same disruptions as food is when we have major global disruptions like pandemics. So if you haven't got good seeds and you haven't got good compost, you're going to struggle to grow good food. So hence some of the projects we're working on at the Environment Centre hinge around composting and seed saving. Community gardens and market gardens in the urban zone in Invercargill, you need a resource consent for that, and they are considered in the district plan under the same characterisation as dairy farming. Now that's looked at on a case-by-case basis, so it's not that it's just, they're treated the same way, but I just thought that's a good indication of how legislation can enable or slow down certain types of food production. Sorry if I'm speaking too fast. I hope you're all following all right. Now, I put this together the other day for home gardeners thinking about, what should I grow in my garden? What's worth growing? So I thought, well, what we really need here is some kind of matrix that we can use for decision making, right? So if you look at the top line of sprouts there, now I've weighted things, the higher the number, the better the weighting, okay? And the lower the number, the not as good. So if you look at sprouts, they're extremely mobile. You can pick up a jar of sprouts and you can take it with you when you go to work or when you move house or whatever. They don't require any expertise to grow. They don't require very much space at all. Likeability, it varies depending on who you're talking to. Ask some kids and they might go, ugh, never. But other people absolutely love them. I gave them a 3. Nutrition, extremely good for you. They get a 5 on that front. Cost to buy. Now, the cost to buy is like if you went into the supermarket to buy them instead of growing them yourself. And that depends where you get them from. So I just gave them a 3. So the weighting for those guys out of 30 is 26, which is pretty high. And if you compare at the lower end of that, say a capsicum, for example, they're pretty easy to move around. You can grow a capsicum in a bucket. They can be a bit tricky to grow. They don't require a huge amount of space. Again, you could fit them in a bucket. There's a tomato there, but capsicum would work. They tend to be enjoyed by everybody. A nice fresh capsicum, delicious. They're pretty good for you. They can be quite expensive, even though there are seasonal factors involved. But the thing is that if you're able to grow it at home, the time when you are able to produce it in your backyard is guaranteed to be the time that they are the cheapest to buy. Because, especially here in Invercargill, we get this narrow little window where we can get things out, but there's glass houses in Nelson where they're producing them all year round. So I gave them a lower weighting. So this was just a kind of a slightly technical way to give that impression of what do you focus your attentions on when you're trying to grow food at home. Spring onions, fabulous. Everybody should grow spring onions. If you tried to grow brown bulb onions, like what you buy at the supermarket in your garden, you would have to devote so much space to getting a year's worth of onions. It's really not worth it in an urban environment. Spring onions, you can grow thousands of them in amongst everything in your garden, and they're fabulous, and you can use them just like normal brown onions as well. And there's perennial types you can get as well, so you just go with the scissors, snip it off, and they grow back again. Even better, right? So when we're encouraging people to get into gardening, I think it's good to think along these kinds of lines. It's worth steering people in the right direction so that they get as much success as they can as quickly as possible. And sprouts and spring onions and lettuces, fast success, so good, and you feel so good about it, especially if you've just started with a small area like a square metre. Fill it with lettuces, and then within a month, you've got heaps of food coming out. It's really satisfying. Setting people up for success is so key. So that was homes. Was that all on homes? I don't remember. Yep, great. So school. Okay. I was a teacher for 5 years. Now the New Zealand curriculum, right at the front end of the curriculum, what the curriculum is all about, the vision, is young people who will be creative, energetic, enterprising, into sustainable social, cultural, economic, environmental future. They value all cultures for the contributions they bring. They'll continue to develop these values over their lives. They'll be confident, connected, actively involved, lifelong learners. Now, I don't know any gardeners who don't exhibit all those characteristics. Yeah, but if you go into any school, you won't necessarily see a lot of this. You'll see a lot of reading and writing and maths, but let's not forget that right at the front end of the curriculum, the whole point of the curriculum is this stuff. It's not necessarily reading, writing and maths. That's just a way to achieve these things. So if we can get more gardening happening in schools, this is where we can be heading kids. And lifelong, once you're into gardening, those of you who are into gardening, you don't really stop being into gardening. Once you've got the bug, it's with you your whole life. So in schools, class gardens, this was my class in Nelson at Clifton Terrace School. We planted garlic. Every week they'd measure it. And we graphed the results, and we grew the garlic, and we weighed them at the start, and we weighed them at the end, and we worked out the ratios. You plant one clove, you end up with this many cloves. It was the perfect school crop because we planted it in the middle of winter, and we harvested it before the end of the school year. Forget about summer gardens in schools. It's so hard to manage a school garden over summer unless you've got a super dedicated parent community or neighbourhood community. There are so many good things that we can grow over the winter. We did the same with broad beans. Perfect. Grow the things that do well when the kids are at school. There's no point having stacks and stacks of tomatoes ripe when there's not even any kids around to appreciate them. But this, brilliant. And then what I was able to do was cure the garlic over summer, and at the beginning of the next school year, my class gave away all of that garlic that they had bulked up to the other classes and said, there's your challenge, see if you can do the same next year. It was really, really good. So in school gardens, you not only get fresh food, your kids get physical activity. Now that's sustained physical activity if you're a gardener throughout your life. Whereas if you are playing sport at school, chances are by the time you leave school, you won't continue playing sport. Okay, that's not true for everybody, but that's a very common theme. That actually the most common forms of recreation, physical activity for adults are gardening and walking and riding bikes. So if we can get kids into this stuff at school, they will continue doing that their whole lives. Okay, and if you've got the community coming, like a community garden at your school, you're getting that interaction with the community as well. And if you can get your school doing some edible landscaping, then you can also reduce the cost of maintenance. That's that cost avoidance stuff. Why are we spending all of this money cutting grass? So here's a little sort of a mock-up of an idea that we were working on at the Environment Centre. What do kids learn from grass? What do you learn from grass? You're in a school, right? It's a place where you learn stuff. What are you learning from the grass that is everywhere? You're learning you can run around on it. You're learning that you have to have a caretaker to mow it all the time. You're learning that sometimes they spray bits of it. But what else are you learning? Is that really fulfilling the curriculum needs? Every space in the school should be a learning space. And if you convert your lawns into gardens, you've converted it into learning space. I'm not saying, this is not necessarily accurate because of course there's no field, and every school has to have a field, absolutely. But edible landscaping, cut flowers as fundraisers for the school. Veggie gardens, native plantings for shelter and biodiversity, herb gardens so kids can put mint and lemon balm in their drink bottles, and the staff can make a nice relaxing herbal tea at morning tea time instead of cranking through the coffees and stuff. Rainwater tanks for watering the garden, but also as a community resilience resource. So much roof space at schools, so much water. A forest garden. It's been found that the more structurally complex nature is, the better the community wellbeing outcomes. So by that we mean different heights of plants, different colours, different shapes, textures, that kind of stuff. So the more complex it becomes, the better it is for you. Forest gardens are the best example of that because they also produce food. So you're getting this well-being effect from being in an environment that relaxes your eyes and relaxes your mind and reduces your stress at the same time as being able to pick stuff fresh to eat. Fantastic. A bulk foods co-op, so you can get cheap food out to the parent community, managed by the kids, weighing, measuring, hands-on, active learning in the school. That is absolute gold for kids when they're learning. Absolutely fantastic stuff. At work, everyone probably got some kind of sunny windowsill. They can have a little window box on that's got some fresh herbs growing in it. Everybody could have sprouts growing in their staff rooms. Every workplace should somehow or other be connected to a composting system, whether it's that you take it home and put it in your compost at home, whether you've got a little worm farm or a bokashi bucket in the staff room. Every workplace should have that sort of thing going on. Edible landscaping, if you're at a business that has grounds. Having crop swaps. When I was working in Nelson in Feijoa season, if anybody else here knows what it's like in Feijoa season anywhere in the country, bags of Feijoas coming in every day, and if you didn't have any Feijoa trees, admittedly most people have Feijoa trees in Nelson, but take home masses of stuff. So if you've got a glut of anything, the best thing you can do is take it and share it with somebody. Fabulous. And lots of workplaces now are looking for community volunteering opportunities where they maybe go out and help at a school garden, or you could go out and help at a community garden, or something like that. So in public, as I said before, there's a lot of public space around that currently is dedicated to, and using our rates, to grow really, really good grass. So this sketch, the idea is to show that there are different systems that are appropriate in different situations and different settings. Remember that if it's owned by the council, it's actually owned by the ratepayers, and that's probably you guys, or you're paying rent to a ratepayer, and that therefore includes you as well. Now, council has an obligation to the four well-being: social, environmental, economic and cultural. So, bear that in your mind, and also thinking about this ongoing cost of maintaining grass. The cost of mowing lawns is never going to go down unless you start introducing animals into the system, like sheep. But the cost of mowing lawns and spraying is never going to go down. So that means that every year your rates are going to have to go up to cover that increased cost. And there, as far as I'm aware, certainly Southern District, there appears to be no plan to reduce the amount of mowing that's done. So what that means is that our councils are happy for us to continue paying more to mow grass. And grass doesn't stop growing. If you know grass, as soon as you stop mowing it, it starts growing really fast. So we're sort of locked into this endless increasing expense there. Right, that's me 18 minutes. So we want to look beyond that, right? How can we move beyond that kind of model? So I did this really quick sketch over Macquarie Park. It's a bit hard to see, sorry, but so I worked out it's roughly 2.3 hectares. Now, if that was a high-producing, well-run market garden, that could produce $240,000 worth of food. It could feed 200 families as an intensive market garden, right? But that's just one model, and that's a high maintenance model, which also could create significant employment. But we could also include in there, we could include community garden, allotments, a harvest walk, where you walk through a long tunnel that's got fruiting nut trees and berry bushes, like a sort of extended forest garden, if you like. Large nut trees like walnuts that you can't fit in other urban areas. That protein is so important. It's easy to plant fruit trees and it's easy to plant vegetables. You can get carbs and you can get vitamins, but that protein is absolutely key. And if you can get that from a super high quality source like walnuts especially, hazelnuts, chestnuts to a lesser extent, but maybe not almonds down here, but between walnuts and hazelnuts, whoa, good food, really good food. Biodiverse shelter belts, forest garden, and still have room for playgrounds and areas for people to run around and play. So there could also be, jobs created out of this. So it could just be lawn, or it could be something else. And really, that's up for, I reckon, for the ratepayers to decide and to tell the authorities. I think I managed to fit everything in pretty well. Don't know if I took a breath there, but thank you again, and thank you for listening so well. And yeah, any questions, bring them on, it'd be great.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Are you exhausted? I'm exhausted.
I'm an extrovert, so I feed off everybody's energy.
Right. We've got 10 minutes for questions. If you want to ask a question, please stand up and project, diaphragmatic. No questions? Yes.
When are you going to present to the council?
Well, yes, thank you for asking. Excellent. Actually, the Environment Centre is working with South Alive, Healthy Families, Public Health South, and we've sort of formed a collaborative food sovereignty group. And one of the things that we're aiming to do from that is to submit to councils, because we've got our long-term planning process coming up, and that's the time to get in there and put these messages across. Not necessarily that we expect this stuff to happen straight away, because there's some pretty big shifts in mindset involved with doing this kind of thing, but that if we can set a target, and one target I would say is let's reduce the amount of grass we mow every year by 5% or 10%, because then at least you've got an end point by which you can say we've stopped doing that ridiculous, outdated behaviour, and we've chosen some much more positive, forward-looking things to do.
Thank you. Over the back. Martin.
What can we do to help encourage what you just showed us? I'd love to plant half the fields in Invercargill. I'd love to see every single primary school have at least half of what you just showed us there. How can we help motivate that point?
I think a key part of that is to find the bit of it that resonates with you most strongly, and then look for how you can build a relationship with somebody who has some kind of involvement with that. So if you've got kids at school and you feel super passionate about the school gardening, go along to the school and talk to the school principal. There are so many good examples across New Zealand of primary and secondary schools setting up extremely well-functioning gardens. Aparima College in Riverton, a prime example. They have invested, the board has invested in paying a market gardener to establish a market garden at the school, funded by the school, so on the school, employed by the school, and on the school grounds with the aim of producing food. So when you're able to connect with somebody and show them that you're passionate about something, and show them a precedent that's been set somewhere else, that carries a lot of weight with it. So if we're talking to councils, if you're talking to a staff member at a council, you could look for a way to connect that person with a colleague at a different council who maybe works in the same department, and show them what that other person is doing, and that it's possible, because people need to see that something is possible within their own frame of what they understand. And if you pitch something that's way too left field for them, instantly it kind of becomes too hard. So if you're talking to a council, look for councils around New Zealand that are already doing really cool stuff. Like Nelson City Council is a great example. They, as a matter of course, they plant fruit and nut trees in every park.
Oh.
That's the council doing it. It's not individual citizens having to devote their time and energy to trying to make it happen and feeling like there's resistance and constantly pushing ahead. Council's gone, yep, this is awesome. Yep, we've listened to what you've said, and they do it. So by being able to say to councils in Southland, look at what's going on in these other cities and these other regions and districts, this is something that can be done. Let's try it here. It's the same with schools. It's the same with your workplace too, probably. Yeah.
One more. Maria?
You know how forestry companies, when they plant forests and hillsides, they get some money by carbon credits.
Yeah.
So if a city plants, walnut trees and things, can that become a source of income through carbon credits because the trees take up carbon?
Yeah, that's really good thinking. That's the kind of joined up thinking that we need to have more and more of. It's thinking about multiple outcomes. That's another of the kind of key things of permaculture, is trying to get multiple yields out of your activities. So if you're going to plant trees, awesome if you can be providing fruit and fresh air and sequestering carbon and all of that. Unfortunately, the answer to that is probably not, because if I'm a little sketchy on this, but if the activity is based around producing a crop, then you're not eligible for carbon credits for it. Yeah, so or, for example, orchards can't earn carbon credits, even though it seems a little odd, and especially because deciduous trees sequester the most carbon. So trees that lose their leaves in the winter, they are the trees that are sequestering the most carbon. Typically, most of our fruiting plants come under those categories, and therefore aren't really eligible. If it was, yeah, I think that's probably the short answer.
Right, thank you. We'll take that. Tony, last question.
I think I might already know the answer, but it's been traditional in Southland for years for gardeners to grow potatoes. I know they didn't even feature on your...
No, not from intent, but accident really. Yep.
I guess where I've tended to use it is more for helping to break the soil up initially, and I also I have to like new potatoes, but yeah, I was interested in that because that's a crop a lot of people do grow. Right?
Absolutely, and I didn't omit it through intention. It was just I just chucked out a bunch of ideas. But potatoes, you're right. That's a key food. You can produce a huge amount of calories from a small amount of space with potatoes, way more than by growing wheat or any other grain crop. They have much higher calorific output as well as fibre and nutrient benefits too. But for your small backyard garden, it's only really worth growing new potatoes, because to grow enough potatoes to store through the winter, especially when you go to the veggie store and they're like $2 a kilo, you know, they're so cheap to buy. But they're so satisfying, like those new potatoes, eh? Like, oh, incredible. Nothing like it, yeah. And like you say, perfect for establishing new gardens. Anyway.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Right, well that's set the tone for the evening. Thank you very much, Nick. Over the page. We just need a couple of minutes for Colin to work out what he thinks he's doing. No pressure. And then we'll have our next two speakers. Feel free to chat amongst yourselves.
Yeah, well, it's so nice to talk to you. Yeah. It's so nice to talk to a bunch of people who are obviously receptive.
Yeah, so I'm allowed
Right. Thank you. Now, to get a very local perspective, we have Jess and Anna, both of whom are hard-working members of the South Alive Fruit and Nut Tree Action Group. Jess has an interest in permaculture, I understand, and Anna has a focus on, well, I wrote it down here. She's just been to Providence, Rhode Island in the USA on a scholarship to look at urban gardens. So it's very topical to have her here. But we're having Jess first, and Jess will, it's going to be interesting to following on from Nick, isn't it, with what you're going to say. Welcome. 10 minutes.
Thank you, Margaret. This is more or less the journey of the Fruit and Nut Group, because we were one of the first action groups from the public meeting held at St Andrew's Church Hall in April 2012, so we've come a long way. We still have 8 of the original 9 members in our team. We were all keen to create orchards for the community to help themselves to the fruit. Meetings were organised to discuss which parks and reserves we wished to create orchards. We had to get permission from the Parks Department, of course, and we chose what fruit trees we wished to plant. Dyacs were very generous with discounts on fruit trees, berry bushes, stakes and webbing, which we paid for by holding monthly sausage sizzles outside Mitre 10 and South City Video. Scratchy boards and the occasional raffle were also held, which enabled us to also purchase our yellow vests, and in keeping with the yellow theme, we sought out yellow gumboots. We Googled, of course, as you do, and Sandy from Veehoff Dairy Services in Ashburton replied. After we explained what we were doing, saying that they would ask their supplier, Dunlop, in the Netherlands. Sandy got back to us saying Dunlop could send yellow gumboots in what sizes. Veehoff also offered to go shares with us with the freight, so we didn't actually have to pay for the gumboots. So we had 9 pairs of yellow gumboots made in Portugal and dispatched by Anilos from the Netherlands arrive in March 2015. We were over the moon. We've pre-dug the holes for the trees at the beginning at Macquarie Street, Panton and Mance before planting. And of course we put the sods back because we didn't want anybody killing themselves. When we were ready to mulch the trees, we collected flattened cardboard from the hospital loading dock. Trev used his mower to give the grass a close shave. We put the cardboard over the area and old carpet pieces around the trees.
Very social group too.
Georgetown Scouts helped at Macquarie and Wagner planting trees and staking, and also a session of weeding at Macquarie. Unfortunately, when we checked Wagner the next day after planting, an apple tree, including stakes and webbing, were gone, and a hazelnut broken. But we became very proficient at splinting broken tree limbs when they were small. Gradually we planted 11 areas, but trees were removed from Elizabeth Park, Avon Road Park and Russell Square due to vandalism and theft. Innerwell also donated an apple tree, which is at Ettrick Street. We started to host an annual grafting workshop with the kind assistance of Robin and Robert Guyton. First at Fernworth School, then the South Alive office in the mall, and lastly under the veranda of the pod. We also started a yearly pruning workshop and now have Paul Saranki, South Alive Trust Board member, sharing his expertise and considerable knowledge on this. Sandy and staff clients from Able helped plant currant bushes, strawberries and sow wildflowers at Main Street, as well as donate 2 dwarf apple trees and a cherry and a plum. They have since visited the orchard to see how they're getting on. We have had generous support from Balance, who donated dolomite lime, AB lime with ordinary lime, and TNZ Growing Products, which had bulk loads of mulch delivered to us. The mulch arrived in a huge truck, which we had to bag up and transport to where it was needed. At times we enlisted the help of the PD workers with the bagging, but they were becoming a scarce commodity with attached health and safety requirements. As it was becoming very labour intensive and most of us worked, we decided to discontinue the bulk loads of mulch. We did put weed mat down on 2 of the orchards, but we soon realised it wasn't very practical and a right pain in the proverbial. So we started taking it out at Ball Street in February. We finally got it up in June. Lockdown slowed everything down. In August, Jacqueline Stewart from Aurora College said she had Year 9 students willing to help us at an orchard within walking distance from the school. So we gladly accepted their help weeding mats, then getting most of the weed mat there up, a mammoth task of which we were most thankful. Keeping on top of the weeds is a big job as we have 8 sites to get around, but we persevere, plus it depends on the weather too. The process has evolved from taking weeds to green waste, to taking them off site, usually to my place to compost, to forming compost heaps on site, utilising the weeds, grass clippings, blood and bone, lime, comfrey leaves and sheep poo. Also, we have been solarising the sheep sorrel, which is a bit of a pain in some of the plots. Underplanting of the fruit trees is ongoing, with berry bushes, strawberries, wildflowers, comfrey and herbs, which will eventually outcompete the weeds. Over the years, we have gradually gained a few more eager volunteers, and now we number 14. Our average age in the past year went from 60 to 54, due to 4 youngsters joining us. We are always looking for young, eager people to help us who are also keen on growing things. But we don't labour all the time. Marie has installed us the value of celebration, so we take the time to celebrate birthdays, go on fishing trips, outings to Maple Glen, Lawrence trawling the op shops, mini golf, 10-pin bowling, movie nights. We all enjoy the chance to have a cuppa and a get-together in each other's company. Indeed, we are the fruit and nut whānau. Thank you.
Just keep going. Are there any questions? That's a history lesson.
Yeah.
No, you explained it really well, thank you. Right, next up is Anna, and she's going to talk about her trip and what she learnt and how it's going to apply to us.
So it's this
Friendly noises it's making.
yeah. Yeah. And then it says presentations.
It is actually separated more, but considering so we've got these 2 people from the parts department come to the secondary group meeting. They're really keen to, yeah, it's staff. Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. I mean, anytime we're doing publicly, like a good example is that Robin wanted to donate a bunch of heritage apple trees to Invercargill to have a heritage orchard like I did do, because it was an 11-page memorandum of understanding that you could sign, and it involves visiting every month, weeds, that's right, but it's actually accessible. Yeah. So in the end, it was easy to that they've already got. Actually, already got well. Spirit is, I'm not sure if they're origin nuts. They are and I think they've already got some council land that they are growing. So they're in trees that so that's quite good, bearing in mind that that's right, and sometimes it's the collaboration that's required to make it happen. Those kind of strategic partnerships. And we're dealing with councils. Yeah, that's right.
It's funny.
So work with councils, it's good to be able to work with staff, but also sort of councils. Often staff will always councillors might want to sort of be constrained.
I'm sorry about the delay.
Yeah.
Okay. Kia ora koutou. Ko takitimu te maunga, ko waihopai te awa, ko marihiku te lohe, ko ana palisa aho. Kia ora koutou. So actually, yeah, can you flick it on for me? Because otherwise I'm going to be walking backwards and forwards.
Do you want to use the microphone?
Well, did you not want the camera?
Yes, going as well.
Yeah.
But it's hard to hear at the end of the room.
Okay, all right, I'll go here. Yeah?
You can move it. Oh, yeah.
Really? This isn't part of my 10 minutes, eh? Okay, so I'm Anna Palliser, and I work with Jess in the Food to Nut group. And I was lucky enough, and I also work at SIT in environmental management teaching. So I was lucky enough to get a scholarship last year, to go to Providence, Rhode Island. And that city in the USA has this ginormous urban food system. So what I thought I'd talk about is why have urban food in the first place? So following on and maybe complementing what Nick was talking about. And then some of the things that I learned that we could do here that kind of saw possibilities again like what Nick was talking about, but from a bit of a different angle. Yes, please. So Providence is about 4 times the size of Invercargill. So I've tried to kind of look at stats thinking, well, if they're doing this, what could we do, size, relationship-wise? And it's got about 11% of people who are food insecure, and that means, you know, they struggle to afford food. And very interestingly, so does New Zealand, and very interestingly, so does most of the Western countries have approximately 11% of people who struggle to find food. And that's something to do with the way our economic and global food systems work, because if you keep a certain, percentage of people very poor, then people will work for less money and they'll be frantic to work and keep working. And, you know, it's a way of driving this whole economic system. Keep a certain percentage of people poor. I'm not saying it's quite as deliberate as that, but that works well with our big global systems. Okay. So just a little bit about why grow local food, why grow urban food. Well, those 11% of people can get food more cheaply and can get more nutritious food. A lot of the food that you see in the supermarkets, the cheapest food is energy dense, so it's like you get a lot of carbs, you've got energy to walk and move around and do your work, but nutrient poor. And so you're unhealthy, you get things like obesity and diabetes and other health complaints because the food that's the cheapest is poor in nutrients. But the problem is, as well, although it's fantastic to get loads of people in an urban area growing food, not everybody can grow food, so we do have to think, put this back a bit. I move my hands a lot when I'm talking, sorry. You do have to think about the people who can't grow food, the people who are running 3 jobs to make ends meet, and they've got a family, or the people that are elderly or disabled. Everyone can't grow food, so we need options to feed people healthily that isn't just about everybody growing their own food. No, not yet. Also, another reason for building urban food systems is because, and Nick mentioned this, is because of the global shocks that are predicted to impact our global system. So things like climate change affecting the big food baskets, and so we're not going to get as much food delivered to our doorstep once climate change really starts. I mean, it started obviously, but you know, there's going to be some problems with food production because of climate change. There's also problems because of energy shortages, either not enough fossil fuel-based fuel, or we've got to keep it in the ground because of climate change, and renewables will never fill, you know, we can't just transition to a renewable world and have as much energy. So the transport networks that bring food from many other countries to the local area are likely to be affected by these things, as they are by economic crises. You know, we've predicted a global economic crisis after COVID that's worse than 2008. New Zealand, we're doing quite well at the moment, but globally, there's likely to be some economic crises, and all of these might impact that global system. Just one click, please. I've got it. And so, if you've got a good local food system, building the skills that we need, the resources like composting and seeds and tools and people being able to grow food, we're building resilience for our people in the face of these shocks that might happen and might impact our global system. And to me, that's really important. Okay. And also, I want to talk a little bit about, in terms of Providence and what I learned there, building local food economies. So, like Nick mentioned, how there can be jobs out of these things, you know. You can have market gardens that are producing food and young people making, or older people making a living out of food production locally. It's not just about volunteering and growing for families. It's also about thinking about different ways of enhancing the local economies. So, moving into what some of the things that I learned in Providence. So, Providence, can't see my own thing. Providence has well over 6,000 people growing food, has community gardens within 10 minutes of most areas, so that you can go. You've got these like big spaces. You can, for a very low cost, have a large raised bed for you and your family, or a couple of large raised beds, and then you've got for you and your family and selling on the farmers market. They don't have the same problems with council about having to get licensing to grow food to sell. So it's up to you. If you've got surplus, you can sell it at the farmers market. It's quite easy transition to make. So they have a lot of urban gardens where people are growing for families, but also a lot of urban farms just on vacant lots where people are growing food to sell at the markets. And in terms of 6,000 people, well, it's more than 6,000 people, but just in terms of 6,000 people, in terms of Invercargill is about a quarter the size. We could be talking 1,500 people doing this, you know. Next, please. And then they've got a food hub, and what this food hub is there's an app where people who are growing food can advertise their growing and their growing style. You know, I do it organic, I've got this really sweet farm, this is the history of my farm, this is what I grow, and this is how much things cost. And then people who want to buy food can go on and have a look and think, oh, I'm going to buy some peas from that farmer, and I'm going to buy some potatoes from that farmer. And together, they put together their order. The farmers bring the food to this hub, and the hub delivers it to the sellers. And they've got a big food procurement network. So what they're doing is they've managed to get schools buying it for school meals. They've managed to get hospitals buying it for the hospital food, and universities buying it for the university canteens, you know. So they've got this kind of local procurement going on, where local agencies and institutions are buying local food instead of buying the more global network food. And you can see the stats there, which could translate into 4.7 million in Invercargill in food hub sales. So I'm just trying to inflame interest, really. I mean, I think it is a step-by-step process, and we're quite a long way from this, but these are possibilities of things that could develop from really looking at what do we want to do with our lawns, with our green spaces in Invercargill. Next, please. So the other thing they do, and this is kind of reflecting a bit what Nick was saying about the teaching, this cafe here is one example of local food cafes and restaurants in Providence. This cafe is quite special though, because it's run by people who are just about on the edge of leaving high school, who are kind of at risk, you know, people who aren't very good students, and they run training for these young kids, these teenagers, and the teenagers are trained up in how to do add-on value produce in a commercial kitchen, you know, jams and chutneys and things like that from local food. They're trained up in how to run a cafe. They're trained up in how to sell this local food at the farmers' markets. They're trained in how to cook delicious recipes from local food. And they're put through this training regime, and they run this cafe and sell on the farmers' markets. And there's quite a lot of emphasis on training up young people in the local food system. So it's kind of, Nick was talking a lot about primary and lower high school. This is the higher level, the kids that would be coming out and maybe ending up on benefits because they haven't really developed the skills through the education system that they need to get work. So what this is here is some of this add-on local produce being sold at the farmers' market. Harvest Kitchen is the name of that cafe that you just saw. And this is just a picture of one of the large network of Summers farmers markets that run across the city. And then in the winter, because it's too cold in Providence to have farmers markets in the winter outside, they have a big old industrial building where they run this absolutely enormous winter's farmers market. So everybody comes there in the winter. Yeah. And then finally, to kind of complete the cycle, you know, you grow it, you make things out of it, you find a way to sell it and distribute it to people, and then you start thinking about the whole cycle. So what happens to the food waste? Well, it's composted. So what they've got in Providence is a business that builds compost for the whole city with local ingredients and delivers it around the city. So it still costs, but it's local compost delivered by the lorry load to the areas that need it. And the other thing they've got is this non-profit organisation called Groundwork does land remediation. There's a lot of industrial vacant lots in Providence, and they can be quite polluted, so they're really good at getting gangs of young people, again training up young people in land remediation and land restoration, and then building on these places after they've been sealed or whatever, large community gardens and urban farms where people can grow food. So that kind of begins to complete the cycle of an urban food system. I think that's about me. Yeah, there you go. So, you know, I'm in this group that Nick was talking about that's bringing people who have this interest together to talk to the council and to try and support some of these things beginning to grow in Invercargill, and I think it's really exciting. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Anna. You really don't know. You see each other daily, weekly. You don't know what they're up to. Any questions of Anna? Tony?
Just a comment, Anna. We had
Speak
met,
up.
Sorry, we had met before because I was a SIT student. But thinking back to the 60s, we actually had a lot of this. I remember, I mean, I'm in the same house as my parents, but Dad had half of the section committed to garden, and all the surplus was, I used to run a wheelbarrow around to the corner shop, and because she liked my father's vegetables, she would take any surplus. So the interesting thing is that we had a lot of these systems going back 50 years, and we've sort of moved away over the time.
Health and safety.
Well, and now it's health and safety. We couldn't possibly accept vegetables grown in a domestic garden and sell them, but that wasn't always the case.
No, that's
so, in a sense, what we're looking to, with an excellent presentation, is going back to what we...
The pendulum is swinging.
Yeah, I think in a sense that, but I think also, like some people, if you say, oh, we're turning back the clock, we're going back into the past, I think people get a bit worried that we're just trying to turn our back on progress. I think it's a forward movement. It's kind of, we've recognised that, you know, even with health and safety, a lot of the food that's sold in the supermarkets is saturated with chemicals. People are beginning to realise, so it's not really turning back the clock. It's seeing that we had something really good then. We've moved into this mass production and mass sales that for a while there seemed to make things a lot better, and we're beginning to see some of the big shortfalls in that, so we're moving on. I prefer to look at it that way because people really don't like thinking of just going back.
Okay, thank you. Yes?
I'm interested, so a couple of years ago we tried to set up a market garden with a couple of other mothers, and trying to go on a business venture where there's quite a lot of outlay at the beginning, when potentially your crop might fail, and you've got taxes to pay and ACC levies and a business mentor. Do you know if in Providence the council actually had subsidies or funding in place to kind of help this transition phase?
The way it happened there is quite similar to how South Alive has happened here. So the way it happened there was a local group got together 30 years ago, very interested in promoting urban food for poor people particularly, and they got funding as a non-profit to start developing this thing. And they're still doing the same thing, only on a much bigger scale now. So they get a lot of funding. A bit like South Alive, we just started with that little bit, and now look, we've got the pantry, we've got this hub, and a lot of that's been through funding that we've attracted. So that would be the way to go. And then the people who are organising well, it might be the way to go. And then the people who are organising this non-profit thing, so they support the people who are coming in, and those people still get to sell their food as though it was, you know, it's their food, but they've been supported all the way through. So it hasn't so much been... America's really good for non-profits, you know, they've got a lot of really big philanthropy things going on over there, more than we have. But when you just look at what South Alive achieved, we could achieve something similar through that limit, you know, I mean, it's not ideal, the whole funding mechanism, but it could help to iron out some of those creases that you were talking, those hurdles that you were talking about. Yeah.
And just to add to that, South Alive is a community-led organisation. Yeah. We had our consultation meeting last week, I think it was, and that was open to the public. So that's how we get our funding, because we're community-led. The community tells us what they want, and we work with them to help steer in the right direction, or we know people here, or we know other people there. We have very good contacts now. They like us out there. Any other questions? Yes?
You mentioned at the start there was like 11% of food insecure people. So what sort of reduction have they had in provenance?
Yeah, that's the slightly negative side, not a lot.
Right, yeah.
Because when you're starting, so even though it's huge compared to what we have even in, I think, Wellington, it's a lot bigger than anything I know here, it still hasn't made a lot of dint on that. Because when you think 11% of, what is it, 180,000 is a lot more than 6,000. And those people often can't buy a lot of their food from the farmers' markets because it tends to be more expensive than the supermarkets. You know, there's a whole heap of things that go within that. So actually reducing food security is a huge enterprise within our system, especially if, and this is where the funding problems come in that I was saying, it's not ideal, but it's better than nothing. If the funding model kind of replicates our economic system and becomes very competitive, you have to compete like a business with these global businesses. So it becomes quite difficult to keep your prices low enough to feed the poor. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Now we're going to have Kate French, but we need a little tech check first.
Yeah, thank you.
She's got her own technology person.
We've got a little tech angel with me tonight. We specialise in coffee, not technology, so Maria's just going to set up a slideshow for me.
Right, we're on again. So something a little different and yet connected to all we've heard. So I won't ask you to put your hand up if you've never been to the batch, because that's not fair. But Kate French from the batch will talk about their contribution to food freshness and sustainability, and whatever else you've got to tell us. Thanks. Please welcome Kate.
Thank you, Margaret. So what I'm here to talk about a couple of things tonight. So we've got a wee urban garden space at the Café, and also what we are doing in terms of using our waste product and what we're doing to help eliminate some of our waste product and how we're using gardening to do that. So feeling incredibly motivated, I must say, from the talks that we've already had. Haven't been along to one of your very informative evenings, as I now discover, and feel really inspired about this. And just sitting here thinking about there's so many more things we could be doing ourselves. Obviously, cafes have got a fairly bad rep, and rightly so, for the waste, the food waste. We're really demanding on food production, and so I can already ticking over about so many things we could be incorporating, and more we could do if we had a bit more resource of time. But really keen to keep these conversations going, and anyone that wants to come and talk or come into the cafe and have a coffee and keep progressing these conversations, we would really value that. So we're a bit of a sidetrack, but we'll get into it. So if you've been to the cafe, you will potentially recognise this wee garden space. So this is actually an edible garden. This started 10 years ago when we first started the cafe. So when the cafe was put in, then when the building was all developed, at the time the city council had the tender for looking after the private garden. So it's attached to the building. It's, as I'm aware, it's a bit of a grey space, but it's a privately owned garden that's upkept by us. So the council came along and they said, we've got this garden bed, what do you want in it? And Gareth, my business partner, had this memory of a time when he was in Italy and wandering around the streets, and every space was utilised, every nook and cranny was utilised, not just for visual pleasure, but actually for practicality and for food. And there would be a tomato plant, there would be a herb plant, there would be something that actually had a practical purpose, and not just an aesthetical purpose. So it was his wee vision to plant this out as an edible garden. Initially it's been a bit of a trial and error. It's quite a dry garden, it gets quite a lot of wind, and so we've had to play around over the years about having it practical, and what's going to work for that space and keep it low upkeep. We're quite busy in the actual cafe, we don't have a whole lot of spare time to get out into this garden. So now it's actually looked after by Rachel at Garden Wise, so she keeps the garden, she now has the contract for it. It started off as a vegetable base, so we used to have cabbages and cauliflowers, and we've had broccolis and things in the past. I think we might have had courgettes one year, but really high demand. Again, sort of talking along what Nick's saying, you get in this small space, we get one cabbage, you don't, and that's nowhere near enough to supply us, but it's great for the community. If someone wants to pick one of those, that's great, but we just found it wasn't utilising the space as efficiently as it could. So these days it is more of a herb garden. So we've got a really abundant, you can't see it, there's sages at this end, but there's a massive, very luscious sage crop in there at the moment. There's thyme, you can see the rosemary, fennel, we've got some overgrown artichokes at the moment, pansies in there. So we will clip the gardens and things in the morning for foliage and garnish. We clean them and do what we need to do to them before we use them with the food. We use the herbs and things in the cooking, so we help ourselves to the garden, but it's absolutely open to the public to be clipping and taking things as well. So we absolutely welcome anyone that wants to come along and get some sage for their roast chicken. So that's our urban garden space, but what I'm going to move on to talking about is another garden space that we have. So Gareth is an avid gardener. It's a shame he can't actually be here tonight, but he has had for the lifespan and beyond of our cafe a domestic garden at home that he grows for producing things in the cafe domestically for him, but also we have a section that's we use garnishing and things into the cafe. So he's had that for the lifespan of the cafe, and what we did about 3 or 4 years ago now, we did a full waste audit of the cafe. So we stored all of our rubbish for a week, which is a really desirable, fun job to do. We broke it down into the recyclable stuff, the landfill, the food waste, and the compostable products. We measured it all, weighed it all, and kept a record of it. And we then have gone about a very slow journey to help so we saw the numbers and sort of gone, okay, what can we do to reduce some of this permanent landfill waste? So at that time, we were probably getting about 3 or 4 keep cups a day at that point, and compostable packaging for hospitality, for commercial scale that we were requiring just almost didn't exist. So we couldn't acquire a product that was compostable at a price that we could afford to pay it. So the technology has actually, and things have improved significantly thanks to customer demand. And that time frame has actually moved really quickly. So we could access a compostable product and it would say it would be compostable, but it would have a plastic lining. So domestically, it just wouldn't disappear. And they'd put these lovely tags on their products that they were making to say they were environmentally friendly, but the reality was we didn't have commercial composting systems, so we couldn't do anything with it. Or the pricing was just unaffordable. Composting lids were the real thing that took a long time to come through. And we are now working with Biopack, and they are domestically, our takeaway coffee cups are now domestically compostable. and the lids are all compostable, which you're about to see all of this. So the products are now there at a much more affordable price. So customer demand and some really good conversations that are happening are now allowing us to use these products, which is helping us reduce our waste. So we are doing, as we say here, so we're using the garden space. So Gareth's now has a 5-acre piece of land, and the garden is evolving significantly now. So we are using the garden to as a method to help eliminate and actually compost that waste ourselves. So the method that speaking on behalf of Gareth here a little bit, so my technical knowledge here isn't quite as sensational as his on this, but the system he's using is called a no-turn system. So it's stack it and leave it basically. So he lays it up, it breaks down, and then he plants on top of it. So what he's doing, I'll give you a brief overview. This one on the end is what he's actually doing to establish his garden, is he's making these raised planter beds with a compost base. So he's building these giant baskets out of reinforcing wire, and then you can see the chicken mesh as well, so just to kind of keep it in, and it's also allowing the air to come into the system, and so it's open. So the first step is the layering of it. So you can see the baskets here, so that's a close-up picture, and in behind you can see he's got like they're scattered all around, so they're here, up here, and it's sort of like bordering, so we're just making an empire of compostable raised garden beds, basically. He's in paradise. So it's a 50-50 blend. Again, this is the technical bit, is rehashing this bit. So 50-50 blend of brown and green. So we're using the coffee cups and the napkins. So this is all waste that, the napkins, obviously we have a huge amount of paper waste. The paper straws, any takeaway containers that are coming back in is all compostable. The coffee grounds for the green, and also he's using grass clippings. He's not using any manure at the moment, but he's talking about adding that in. No food waste going in here because he's finding it's attracting undesired animals into his garden. So that's what he's putting into these compost bins at the moment. We don't talk about trying to get those cups later on actually. So this is a picture of the cup lid. So, and you can see one of the cups disintegrating underneath his hand as well. So this, and cups disappearing, this is very approximately at the 2-month mark. So he fills them up, lets the rain come in, and they settle down a little bit, obviously with the rain. The air gets in, the worms come up from underneath, and this process starts happening. He just leaves it to be. So he reckons, he's saying it's about a 6-month process with the method that he's using. This is very ballparking at about the 2-month mark. So then once this is sort of done its thing, at about the 6-month mark, we get this very delightful picture. Great aroma comes out of this. You can see a lid there. But yeah, absolute paradise. So those worms have all just come up from the bottom. They just breed like crazy in this mix. And they are very happy in their wee composting house. And so then what he's doing is, so this is finished. You can still see some lids and stuff sitting on top. You can still see the odd cup on the exterior there. But what he's then doing is planting, he's putting a bit of finer compost on the top. And we might just go. So this is, and then planting into the top of the bed. So this is a planted out garlic bed that you can see here. So you're getting off the top layer and down into that, all that goodness at the bottom. A few eggshells in that one actually. So this is the final product. So he's putting a bit of paper around the outside on that top layer too. So that's that's a wee garlic patch. So so this is just a wee picture of his hothouse and his other wee baby out there. So where we're at the moment, we have got, excuse me, Gareth's got, he reckons about 4 Ness baskets. So I think he's got about 10 out there now. So what he's basically doing is using it to establish this new land and this new garden that he's got. And also just testing the system, testing how sustainable it is for us to be able to use it as, to get rid of our cups and our napkins and things. So he reckons so far he's put about 100 kilos of cups and napkins, paper waste, into the composting system. And when he's finished actually establishing the gardens, what we will do is dig out the Ness, the baskets, and be able to reutilise the compost that we've generated. So into the garden, we're hoping to get an abundant supply to be able to utilise in other gardens as well. But what our aim is here is to actually be able to go out and publicly promote that we can get rid of all the cups. So we have a bit of a no-keep cup policy at Café, which is very disappointing for a lot of people. Many a reason why we've had to do that. But we promote this to people that are disgruntled by that. So we say, look, these are fully domestically compostable. If you are not composting, bring them back. We will do it for you. So we passively promote that we're doing it, but we would love to be a bit more actively promoting what we're doing here, but we've just got to make sure we can do it on the right scale. We'd like to, future sort of next year, looking towards maybe being able to get a bin on site in the Café so that we can be more readily collecting this this compostable packaging that we are putting out to the earth, and just make sure that we're doing the responsible thing by getting it back and making sure it ends up where we would like it to end up. So that's us. That's sort of what we're up to at the moment and the mission we're on. So yeah, has anyone got any questions?
Seems to be a bit of a theme here. Question?
Yeah, so have you noticed that your waste has reduced over the period that you've been doing it?
Yeah, so we haven't gone back. That the accumulating and weighing is quite the mission for us, so we haven't done that yet.
Do you think, is your gut feeling that you have?
I can't see how it wouldn't. Like, we were using a takeaway cup that was not what we have now. So I just, 100 kilos this year. We're busier than we were 3 or 4 years ago. But yeah, we've already reduced it by about 100 kilos.
So do you pay a rate that covers your waste being taken away? Is that managed through the council's waste management?
So no, it's not. So we separate off all our cardboard, and we the guys down at the recycling centre come and collect that. So we pay them to come and collect that cardboard, but we separate it all and store it all, and they come when we get a giant mountain half the size of this room. And we take all the glass down and the cans and things. We do all of that to the recycling centre, and then our end-use waste goes into a skiller at the back of the Café.
And so that's privately managed?
Yeah. And the measuring thing is going to be tricky for us because obviously we've had growth too. So but it's small steps, and we feel much better about this situation. So
Yeah, so you should, yes.
So let people know that you actually offer coffee grounds.
So we have. Yeah, we've done that for so long that I forget that that's...
Yeah, sorry.
Cool, Tony, thank you. So we've got at the door, there's a basket, there's always a basket there of coffee grounds, so we just bag up the coffee grounds. I think heaps of cafes are doing it now. And so if we don't have any, by all means ask at your other local cafe. So we just bag those up, put them at the door, free, take them home. If you see one there, grab it. We used to always have a supply, but now that we're using the grinds for the compost, we're actually using a lot more, so it's not as available. But yeah, if there's none there, ask as well, because often the knock boxes that we use to drop into, they're often half full, and for a domestic garden, depending on what you're using it for in your domestic garden, that's really valuable too. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, just curious to know if you have done soil testing on your compost sites.
This is a Gareth question, but no. I don't think he has yet, but it would be really interesting to see how it comes out, because obviously the approach is, the motive is not too much labour involved in getting it going and getting the product gone, but it would be really interesting to see. Yeah,
My question would be around bioplastics and toxicity or potential toxicity.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Definitely come to the cafe and have a convo with Gareth about that, because it would be very interesting to see that the end result of actually doing it. And again, like Biopack claim that this product is domestically compostable, we are seeing it disappearing, but like you're saying, is there microtrace of plastic still in that soil happening?
The worms look very happy.
Sorry?
Thriving.
Yeah, the worms love it. They are very happy, yeah.
And just, on that note, Wellington City Council just recently were in the news for not accepting compostable takeaway cups, because their compost is biogas certified and they're not allowed to use those things as part of that certification.
Right.
So there may well be some kind of residue.
Would love to see where these ones, because obviously, like for a council, they can't say, okay, well we can have we're using Biopack, and I'm not sure if that would work, but they can't say, oh, we'll take a Biopack one, but we won't take a Hudamaki. So they can't have that discrimination. They have to have a blanket ban. Absolutely. And for domestic composter, my coffee cup, I can chuck that in compost. No, that one's actually full of plastic. So would be very interested. If anyone has any knowledge in that, please come and see us and talk to us about it too if they've seen any testing or anything that begs to differ what we are believing is going on. Definitely keen to hear. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to invite Stephanie. She's taking the place of the person who was originally coming, who's called in ill. So Stephanie, I'm assuming, is a compliance officer? Planner. Ah.
Very close.
So Stephanie will tell you what she does and how this fits in here.
Actually, while she's getting that, I'll just give everyone a little introduction to who I am. My name is Stephanie Ellis. I did the environmental management degree at SIT, and then I became a councillor. Well, not a councillor, I work at the City Council. I'm a planner. We do resource consents, talk about forests, we talk about subdivisions, we talk about businesses and all sorts of activities. So we are, is this better?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Just stand a bit further away from that one. How's that? So I work at the City Council, and we're always happy to talk about everyone's cool ideas and subdivisions and all sorts of things. We like to hear about it, and we want to guide people through their ideas to achieve the most, not the best, but good outcomes. The idea of the district plan is to prevent negative effects on people rather than stop people's dreams from happening, because we want that to happen. We want what the city wants. We're public servants. We're here for you. So one thing, I just thought I'd bring up, because a lot of people aren't aware it's on our website, this is our mapping system. As you can see, there's a number of maps. We have recycling and all those sorts of things. The main one I use is the district plan and for the hazard maps and the planning information. The hazard map shows you all the flooding zones, while the one on the planning information shows your significant veg and your zoning. So we'll just go on to that one. I won't zoom into any area because you're most welcome to go and search your property. We have all sorts of layers. Turn that off. The green ones are our sig veg. We do have rules around our sig veg for cutting and trimming and all sorts of things. There's a difference between significant vegetation, outlined in the green, and all other areas, indigenous vegetation. There's definitely provisions around clearing and cutting, and it's all very different and all very situational. So if you're ever intending to do that, particularly if you're in Ototara or Bluff, near those significant vegetation zones, come in and see us, and we're happy to take a look at anything. Bring us some pictures, and we'll see what we can do. Most of the time it's controlled activity, which requires consent, but it's going to be granted, subject to conditions. Normally that involves around mitigation and all sorts of things. So most people I imagine here are from the city, Ototara, Bluff. Excellent. So in most of those zones, in Ototara, there is provision for agricultural activities, providing your site is large enough. Agricultural activity is a discretionary activity, and it does refer to forestry, the animal husbandry, particularly intensive. There's horticulture and all sorts of other things. And there's one more which is missing off the top of my head, which I'll just look up to make sure I don't miss it. Beekeeping, that's what it was. I knew it was something. So the aim of this, and as a discretionary activity, you will require resource consent, as explained for here. There is a difference between operating an agricultural activity and operating a residential activity. If you have a garden in your residence, that's not agriculture. If you're providing food for you and yours, that's still a residential activity. You don't require a consent. It's okay. But if you want to operate an intensive chicken farm in the middle of Invercargill, we would like to know about it and we'd like to see some plans. If you are concerned that your activity is an agricultural activity and you do require a consent, take some pictures, draw some plans. They don't have to be perfect, and we can take a look at them and see if you do need a consent. We're always happy to guide people through, although we can't write them for you. We can definitely direct you to the right areas of the district plan. We do have guides as well online if you're looking at doing any other residential activity, and if you're worried about those, we are happy to talk to you. We do have a note about polytunnels, which would be the main thing. There is provisions on side yards and heights and site coverage, although we would love to have everyone have great big beautiful sites with large veggie gardens and provisions for outdoor space. That isn't the case. Housing ideals have changed over the years, as you can note. There's some properties with large open spaces and big beautiful old houses, and there's some with a large number of small lots on small sections, with most of it being paved. There's different ways that we operate the district plan, and it's changed over the years to meet the intentions of the public. Our density is now 400, and we do require that 400 metres squared, just in case, for the residential 1 zone, most of Invercargill, inside, not outside, and different provisions for different zones. But 30% of that needs to be permeable, and there's provisions for outdoor living and other areas such as that. What you do with it is your decision. If you want to grow vegetables, we fully support that. We can help guide you through those sorts of provisions if you're looking at doing it in your property and you're concerned about permeable surfaces. I'm trying to think of anything else that I might need to note. I'm afraid I'm not well versed on animal keeping. Apologies. But if you do have questions about animal keeping, building polytunnels, provisions for community gardens, you can come in and talk to us. Plans are available between 9 AM and 1 PM, and if you would like to time outside of this, please call ahead. But we also have builders on call. We can get you in contact with someone from the parks team, someone from Three Waters, if you would like to put in a water tank to help save some money. That's perfectly fine. We can look into consideration for that and ensure that you don't breach any of the district plan rules, the building rules, the number of bylaws which we have, which are all available on our website. If you'd like to read the I'd say 400 pages. I'm afraid they're numbered by section rather than actual. I could show you a lovely graph, but I'm afraid it's not that interesting and surely not as colourful. So we're happy to talk to you if anyone has any questions. Was that good timing? That's very good timing. Excellent. Yes.
What is the City Council's position now on planting trees out on the road verge?
The road verge will differ depending on safety. The planning department, parks and the roading department all intend to work closely together to try and ensure people's safety as well as keeping it green and lush. We do, luckily, based on our old planners who actually designed the city, the lovely grid system, they did put considerations in for these large parks and wide open spaces to try and break up the high density in the middle of the town. We are discussing with them currently, if you're concerned about Ototara, to ensure that the drains are maintained. But there's a number of things, and I'm afraid it does take time for us to resolve them. Did that answer your question?
Some birds that have drains.
Yeah, there's many different types. There's
So
ditch
do they
drains.
still allow you to plant a tree out on the road, on the verge?
Normally,
Or do you have to go in and speak to them and find out where the drains and that?
it would depend on the zone. The best thing to do would definitely be come in and speak to the roading department. Depending on where you want to put the tree can depend on the outcome. I imagine if it's not going to cause safety issues, there's feasibility that it could be perfectly fine.
Thank you.
Sorry, I might help Sophie with the...
Stephanie, it's fine.
Keep calling me Sophie, I'm sorry.
At least it's not Steve.
I wanted a tree on my berm, so about 2 years ago I just called up the council main line and I just said, look, this is the idea that I have, and they put me through to Parks, and Parks, what they told me, so that was about 2 years ago, is that apparently every year they have a budget for putting trees in places, and so they said that twice a year they check all the berms, and next time when they go around my berm they'll just see what the size is. And for my berm, they said no, because it's only this wide. And I was trying to talk them into putting feijoas there, because basically I said, look, they have shallow roots, they're not going to go down, they're not going to lift the pavement. But they said, look, because if you put it in the berm, and mine is so small, what if I sell the house, and then you owners don't want to deal with the trees, and then the parks department have to maintain them. So to me they said no, but they said that if my berm had been wider, then we said yes.
The placement of things outside of property is all very dependent on a number of things. I know that parks are very protective of their old ancient trees down in Windsor area, and if you wish to cut one down, It can take time, and there's obviously going to be mitigation, but we want to keep our old trees. They take so long to grow, it'd be such a shame if we had to cut any of them down.
Anna?
How much would a consent cost? Like, say someone turned a vacant lot into an urban farm and they wanted to grow food to sell on the farmers market. So the sort of consent you're talking about, what would be the price of that?
So the initial cost for a land use consent is $900, but there is processing fees in association with that. And it does depend on how long it can take. I know, I understand that they are expensive, but there's a number of things that have to be considered, and there's definitely different considerations to the extent of which a land use consent can cost. If it's a large, complicated land use consent, it may take longer to process, we may require more information and affected party approval. And if it's a more simpler application, it may take less time. But it's hard to determine how much one will cost specifically without seeing an application. And we're always happy to look at things to help determine what sort of information you would need, whether you'd need to get approval from someone or your neighbours to ensure that they're not considered to be affected.
Over the back, yes?
Just carrying on from that, you know, we're trying to support people who might be financially struggling and suddenly something they want to do becomes price prohibitive. I'm also thinking about examples I know, you know, someone doesn't have a big section, they want to put a glass house up, it's got to be X number of metres away from the fence, whatever. And an example I know was a lady put her, little lady, didn't have a big section, had a wee glass house, put it right beside the fence, which I'm pretty sure 80% of houses will live in close to fences. They came around, told her she had to have a firewall and a glass house.
That is a building provision, I'm afraid. So, no, I understand. So we do make space for small accessory buildings within the district plan for residential zones. You are allowed to have a 6 metre long accessory building to breach in the yard. There's provisions for breach in the height. And if you're concerned about this, you're most welcome to come and see us. But I'm afraid that one's a building matter, and it's not controlled by our district plan, which is specifically made for the Invercargill area, whereas the Building Act is made for New Zealand. Yes.
I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this because it's kind of more ministry, but last year they were getting community consultation on, it's called the National Policy Statement for Highly Productive Land, and it's to put a law in place to actually protect our soil that's best for growing nutrient-dense food. And so it says like that it's not actually going to the ministry till like next year. What's in place to stop people converting like good soil, which can never be replaced, into urban development? Because we are seeing more and more development, you know, as everyone's returning to New Zealand and all this stuff.
We do have provisions for the movement of soil. You're not allowed to move certain amounts of arid soil, which actually can be seen if I can. Let's see. So you see the dotted lines, the dots all up the top. Those are all of our soils which have been identified as significant for agricultural. Most of it's located within farming, and there is regulations on how much you can move. It does need to be considered in applications if you were to subdivide a large lot, which does have these soils in it. The mitigation effects and all sorts of things would need to be considered within the application to identify whether it would cause an unreasonable amount of effect, negative effect, to try and avoid those sorts of things.
What do they measure the negative effect against?
Normally it is against the district plan. We do identify key areas based on different activities. We do identify it based on submissions. So there's been a few number actually where applications have been publicly notified to get everyone's opinion on what they think of the proposed. There's limited notification for less extreme, normally involving adjacent neighbours who will be directly affected. And that's the opportunity, and we encourage all to have their say if they wish on any application and any notification that they're given. You don't have to notify, it's complete, or not notify, you don't have to give approval or a submission, it's completely up to you. We do have information based on all of our consents, which are currently being publicly notified on our website.
Right, thank you very much. I'm going to move you on. So we'll need a couple of minutes minutes to set up the next speaker, do we? No, she's just coming up to talk. Right, Jules. This is Jules, our South Alive Community Development and Operations Manager, who will talk to us about her latest project for which she has obtained 2 years funding, and it's all to do with food security. It sounds like a high-level project, but I'm sure Jules will make it simple for us.
Thank you, Margaret. I'm going to make it that simple that I'm not even going to have a PowerPoint or anything. I'm just going to have a bit of a chat to give you some insights about the project we're about to get involved in. As you know, South Alive is community-led, so taking on projects with extra funding and grant deliverables for the likes of MSD probably aren't really our style, but in this case, because food insecurity is such an issue at the moment, and because of the population we live in, and I guess I'm just going to talk a wee bit about that, just to remind you, we're not just South Alive in this building, we represent the people of postcode 9812, which is a very high deprivation area, so that's why this project's going to be quite important. So it's a food secure communities project. The objective from MSD is that communities will work together and implement a food secure communities plan for the area. So the idea is to make a long-term sustainable food security in the community. So why did we as South Alive apply for this fund? Because this fund is designed for community-led development. So that's us, we're a community-led development program. So South Alive already has an affinity with providing food in our community. So as you've heard from Jess, our fruit and nut groups, the orchards, the community gardens out here, and we believe we have the untapped potential to use our South Alive community kitchen, which we have just taken back over in this building between the pantry and ourselves. So that's a place potentially where we could provide cooking classes and cooking skills for our residents. So South Alive works predominantly as a local volunteer base tackling issues through community-led development. And we've already prioritised food insecurity. So in the response to COVID-19 lockdown, we developed a pay it forward scheme. So during lockdown, food insecure families were identified by some of the principals of the low decile primary schools, and they were provided with pay it forward boxes of foods from here at the pantry, and there was also some meat donated and fruit and veggies and that donated too, and cash donations from the community to pay it forward for these families that were struggling from food poverty during that time. So South Invercargill, you probably need no reminding, we've got that high deprivation index, so we do know that the need is great in our community. Low income and unemployment has therefore taken away access for families to nutritious food, and in this community we have a high proportion of Māori and Pacific Island residents, as well as it's a hub for the migrant communities, particularly the former Colombian refugees. So these groups have been greatly affected by food poverty in adverse events such as COVID, and they do need sustainable food solutions. So therefore, us in the Trust, we felt that we'd take on this project, we would apply for the Food Secure Communities grant to have an opportunity to have a look at what's happening in South Invercargill, to consult with you, our community, and consult with other groups within our community, as well as the stakeholders who work within this community, so that we can put together a food secure communities plan. So I know that it's been a long workshop tonight and there's lots of inspiring ideas, but I will, just before you go, just ask you to fill out a questionnaire for me about what your insights are, about what you think food insecurity issues are for our residents, and any ideas that you have, because we just got to tap into all that knowledge to make a plan for this community. There's been a couple of the presenters mentioned tonight, like we have got together as a group and looked at what the issues are and things like seed saving and urban gardens and that could help our communities. So we've got some good stakeholders out there that have got some ideas too. So those are ideas that are transferable not only south and wide, but when you hone down on what's happening for the people of South Invercargill, we can use that knowledge to use the ideas of what's happening in Riverton, use the ideas of when Anna went to Rhode Island, like those sort of things we can all tap into and then help our communities. So hence that's the plan, that we will take this money from the MSD and we'll make a plan and make them happy, but also make an impact for the people of South Invercargill. So there's a number of things we could potentially do. So again, I'm really keen to hear your ideas. So the likes of our action groups, Jess and the team, they could educate some of our residents informally or formally, whether it's out in the community gardens. They're just talking with some residents and showing them what they can eat, and they could learn more about food foraging in our community orchards. The community kitchen could provide some cooking classes and a space for education, and building on those ideas of vocation and employment, like of the Service Academy from Aurora College. Not only can they cook in their own school, but come down here to this community hub and use it as a transition too, and vocationally as well. And then we're also confident that we could be here to provide food security support if we have some more adverse events like COVID hit again. So we'll look at all those, and we will get a hold of all those stakeholders with some great knowledge and evidence-based research too, and we'll steal that as well and apply it directly to your 9812 postcode community here in South Invercargill. So yeah, we're already working, well, I'm already working with some people. We've got the funder turning up tomorrow, so we have plenty to tell him after tonight that we can do it, because we're the only, down here, the only urban rejuvenation trust that has got the funding. The other ones are kind of more food collectives and that type of thing, so they're sort of really working in the food area already, but we're just tapping it alongside the other things that we're trying to do for our residents. So one of the things I've just been working on the side, and they're just outside, is I've been talking with the men's shed. So we've made up some prototype vegetable planters, and they are a potential idea of something we could do out of the fund. So I'd like your opinion. So I've got my questionnaire here to ask you what your thoughts are about what the food insecurity issues are, but I'd also just like you, as you stretch your legs at the end, to pop out there and have a look at the food planters and tell me what you think about those. Just the size, the height, do you think they're practical? Have you got an amazing idea or something else you've seen as well, just jot that down on the piece of paper, or just email into me if you just got fatigue. If you've got fatigue and there's not many questionnaires filled out, I'll send them out again by email in the next couple of days. If there's only 10 and not 50, I'm after you. Because after all you've heard tonight, and not only, I'm sure you've all got amazing gardening skills and a passion about this, otherwise you wouldn't be here. So I'll get you either way. Does that sound all right?
That sounds fine. Thank you very much. 9:15, well timed. So thank you to our speakers again. Diversity is much talked about, and we certainly got it tonight, although there is a common thread, isn't there? And I'm sure, I'm thinking there may be some New Year's resolutions being promulgated around somebody's head. Before we close, I've got a couple of notices. Sorry about this. After our very successful first two seminars, a number of people said that these evenings should not be free, that there should be a charge. Now, our South Alive team has already agreed to make them free, and we're happy for that. But we do have a koha jar out there just to cover both camps. It's on the supper table. And if you're feeling a bit sort of woozy, as it's been suggested, You can refresh yourself with a cup of tea and a bun, and then you'll be ready to fill in the questionnaires which Jules has with her, and a pen. The koha would certainly assist with the payment of the advertising for these things. Our group, our housing group, is taking a break now, but we will be bringing more alternative housing seminars to you from February the 18th. So let's have a break. Our speakers will be having a cuppa with us, and they're available for a chat for a while. Please don't monopolise one, as others may have questions that are just as burning as yours. And thank you for coming, and we wish you all a safe and blessed Christmas season. Ka kite anō.